Good afternoon, everybody. The Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Oversight and Management Efficiency will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to determine if the Department of Homeland Security, the DHS, is managing its major acquisition programs effectively. The Chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. The Department of Homeland Security, the DHS, spends billions of taxpayer dollars each year on a variety of programs intended to better secure the homeland, including systems to secure the border, screen travelers, protect cyber infrastructure, and respond to disasters, among other missions. DHS's current major acquisition program ultimately may cost taxpayers over $200 billion. Needless to say, strong accountability and oversight is absolutely necessary to guard against waste, fraud, and abuse. Since its creation, DHS has had its share of acquisition failures. Customs and Border Protection's Secure Border Initiative, the network SBI Net, and the Coast Guard's Deepwater program remain models of how not to manage an acquisition program. SBI Net alone cost taxpayers over $1 billion with few results from that investment. Since 2005, watchdogs at the Government Accountability Office have had DHS's acquisition management on its high-risk list. Despite steps taken by DHS to issue an acquisition policy that reflects program management practices and create an office focused on acquisition oversight, programs continue to put taxpayer dollars at risk. Most importantly, acquisition mismanagement also puts our security at risk. Men and women on the front line securing our borders, protecting our airports, and defending our shores will need to wait longer for systems that may not fully meet their operational needs. This is just simply unacceptable. Several examples in a GAO report released today highlight systems being delivered later than promised. CPB's integrated fixed towers over 6 years late, Coast Guard's long-range surveillance aircraft 9 years late, and its national security cutter 4 years late. In addition, of 7 programs that GAO reviewed, cost estimates increased by 40% over what DHS originally approved. As a result, DHS expects to spend almost $10 billion more than they originally estimated on these programs. GAO also found that DHS authorized programs to deploy capabilities without operational testing, including 3 programs managed by CBP and the Coast Guard, Having served as a combat aviator in Iraq, I'm incredulous that DHS expects its personnel to use equipment that hasn't been field tested, not to mention the fact that I'm sure we paid for testing. In other instances, testing may have been done after key decisions were made. The bottom line is testing isn't about checking the box. It's about ensuring that tools we give to frontline operators actually work. DHS simply must do better oversight of its acquisition programs. A GAO report issued last month showed that DHS has an ad hoc approach for some of its oversight efforts because of a lack of written roles and responsibilities. DHS also has done a poor job over the years of holding programs accountable to its acquisition policy. As DHS Inspector General John Roth noted in our first hearing this Congress, there aren't really any consequences for that disobedience. Exactly 1 year ago today, Secretary Johnson announced his Unity of Effort initiative to improve the execution of DHS missions. Although DHS has created several new mechanisms to discuss key decisions, it remains to be seen if these efforts are leading to improved outcomes and better safeguarding of taxpayer dollars. Improving acquisition outcomes at DHS remains a priority for this committee. Last Congress, the House passed the first ever bill that comprehensively reforms the DHS acquisition process. The bill empowered senior DHS officials to hold programs accountable, established strong accountability for programs with significant cost and schedule growth, and required an effective strategy to inform DHS major purchases. This legislation was praised by numerous stakeholders, including the Comptroller General, DHS Inspector General, Secretary Johnson, and industry groups. As the committee re-engages acquisition legislation this Congress, this hearing will provide areas on which to focus. Certainly look forward to examining DHS's acquisition programs and processes to better understand what must be done to fix long-standing problems. Until these problems are resolved, we can't be certain that billions that DHS spends will result in better acquisition outcomes for the taxpayer and frontline operators. The chair will now recognize the ranking minority member of the subcommittee, the gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Watson-Coleman, for any statement she may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this important hearing. This is a very important discussion to improve the efficiency of some of the Department of Homeland Security's most essential operations. In adopting the Acquisition Management Directive and by creating the Office of Program Accountability and Risk Management, the Department has taken constructive steps towards utilizing the information derived from acquisitions programs' own work to assess the program's readiness to move through successive stages of investment and capability development. At the same time, both of the recent GAO studies we'll discuss today have identified deficiencies in the compilation, approval, and currency of acquisition program baselines at DHS, a concern which dates back to the first edition of GAO's DHS Quick Look published in June 2010. GAO's analysis related to last month's report on DHS acquisition oversight found that in the DHS master acquisition oversight list from this fiscal year, 25 of 72 level 1 or level 2 acquisitions listed have received waivers from DHS reporting requirements. In other words, 35% of the programs on the list with life cycle costs initially estimated at $300 million or more have received waivers from requirements to update a range of acquisition-related information, including cost estimates. To exercise our oversight responsibility, members of the subcommittee must understand the circumstances in which the waivers requirements the acquisition programs report on previously acknowledged indicators of their progress. The subcommittee has asked the Department to provide a May 2013 memorandum from the Undersecretary for Management granting these waivers, and it is concerning that we have just received that memo, making it very difficult to thoroughly and appropriately assess DHS guidance on the issue. Furthermore, GAO's recent assessment of 22 of the Department's costliest acquisition programs now underway finds that 6 of these programs have not received approval of their acquisition program baseline from DHS leadership, though Department policy requires such. GAO additionally finds that despite the lack of fully approved baselines, these 6 programs have spent a total of $5 billion as of GAO's review. Of the 16 programs in the sample that GAO could assess against the APBs, 2 met costs and scheduled baselines. As of the review, major system acquisitions at the Department of Homeland Security spend billions of dollars each year and provide our country's frontline operators with the capabilities they need to achieve their critical missions. When a DHS acquisition program falls short in terms of effectiveness or efficiency, it crowds out investment in other high-priority missions. I'm aware that Chairman McCall intends to introduce a bill to reform DHS acquisition similar to legislation that was passed by the House in last Congress. Members on this side look forward to working with you to help to develop and improve the bill in this subcommittee. I'd like to focus on making sure this new legislation reflects a strong preference on the part of Congress for DHS leaders and program managers to collect and use knowledge developed by program offices. This information reduces the risk incurred and enhances the value DHS receives when the department makes major acquisition investments. In addition, I believe that DHS acquisition reform legislation should require that the department show good cause to an acquisition decision authority in any case when DHS departs from best practices in knowledge-based acquisition management. I'd like to thank the panel of witnesses for appearing before the subcommittee today. I look forward to hearing from their perspectives on this proposal. I'm very interested in hearing from the Department of Homeland Security. I'm sure you will use this hearing as an opportunity to outline for the committee how the Secretary's Unity of Effort initiatives will reverse the department's troubling effort. I thank you very much for this opportunity. I yield back my time.
Chairman thanks the ranking member. Other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this important topic. Let me remind the witnesses that their entire written statement will appear in the record. I will introduce each of you first and then recognize you each for your testimony. Ms. Michelle Mackin, did I get that correct? Is a director at the U.S. Government Accountability Office in the Acquisition and Sourcing Management Team. Ms. Mackin joined the GAO in 1988 as an evaluator in the National Security and International Affairs Division. Ms. Mackin has led complex reviews of federal contracting issues, including high-risk contract types, the Coast Guard's Deepwater Recapitalization Project, and Navy shipbuilding programs. The Honorable Chip Fulgham is the Acting Deputy Undersecretary for Management, Acting Chief Acquisition Officer, as well as the Chief Financial Officer for the Department of Homeland Security. Mr. Fulgham joined DHS in October 2012 as its Budget Director. Prior to joining the department, Mr. Fulgham served for 28 years in the United States Air Force, retiring with the rank of Colonel. He is also a graduate of the Citadel, the Military College of South Carolina. Thank you for your service, sir. Dr. Cedric Sims is a partner with the Evermay Consulting Group. From 2010 until 2012, he served as the director of DHS's Office of Program Accountability and Risk Management. Dr. Sims also held other positions in the department, including the executive director of the Enterprise Management Business Office. Dr. Sims holds a doctorate in engineering from Texas A&M University. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. The chair now recognizes Ms. Mackin for her testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Ranking Member Watson-Coleman and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for having me here today to discuss DH acquisitions, an issue we have reported on for quite some time. My statement today is based on two of our recent reports. One, as was mentioned, was issued just last month, and the other is being released today. DHS buys a wide range of systems and technologies to meet its many missions. In fact, the department spends about $11 billion per year on its largest acquisitions, those estimated to cost $300 million or more. I'll briefly touch on three issues today. First, how these large programs are performing in terms of cost and schedule. Second, the status of testing. And third, the quality of information available to Congress and DHS on these large programs. To assess cost and schedule, we selected 22 major acquisition programs. These included Customs and Border Protection Systems, TSA screening technologies, and Coast Guard ships and aircraft, among others. We found, as was mentioned, that 6 of these 22 programs did not have department-approved acquisition baselines. These baselines are critical because they establish agreed-upon cost, schedule, and performance targets. Without having approved baselines, accountability is obscured, and neither we, Congress, nor DHS can know if the programs are performing as intended. This is an issue we've highlighted in our past work as well. Of the remaining 16 programs in our review, we found that 14 had experienced schedule delays, and some also had increases to their cost estimates. In fact, on average, these programs had a 3.5-year schedule delay, and in total, a $9.7 billion increase in expected costs. While each program has its own story, in general, we identified the following reasons for this. Challenges in meeting requirements, for example, due to technical difficulties. Funding shortfalls, where there's a gap, sometimes quite significant, between what a program expects to receive and what it actually receives in a given year. A decision to pursue different or new capabilities after the program has begun. And for some programs, the initial cost or schedule estimates simply weren't sound in the first place and had to be revised. In terms of the testing, 19 of the 22 programs we reviewed had delivered some capabilities to end users, such as border agents or airport screeners. 15 of these programs had been operationally tested, and 6 had passed the tests. For many of those that did not pass the test, DHS's Office of Test and Evaluation has recommended follow-on testing. Also, in our review of 30 DHS test assessments, we found that about a third did not clearly indicate whether all key performance capabilities had been demonstrated. We recommended, and DHS agreed, to reflect this in future test assessments. And finally, regarding the quality of information, good data, of course, is critical to sound decision-making about acquisition programs. However, we found problems with DHS's own system for reporting acquisition information. Program managers are supposed to enter certain information into this system, and senior acquisition officials at the components are responsible for validating it. but we found inaccuracies in cost estimates and blank data fields for some important information, such as expenditure amounts or key program milestones. These issues call into question whether DHS management has the information it needs for effective acquisition oversight, and because this data feeds into DHS's reports to Congress, that means Congress is not getting accurate and complete information. DHS agreed with our recommendation to determine how to hold programs and components accountable for entering and validating the data in this system. That completes my statement. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Ms. Mackin. The chair now recognizes Mr. Fulgham for his testimony.
Chairman Perry, Ranking Member Watson Coleman, and other distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear today and to discuss acquisition management at DHS. First of all, let me express my appreciation to my colleagues from the GAO for their longstanding and dedicated work to support the transformation of acquisition management at DHS. Over the past several years, we have forged an excellent working relationship with GAO and have reached common ground on many issues. I'm gratified by the recent comments that recognize the substantial progress the Department has made to address its high-risk areas, especially those that fall within acquisition management. We are committed to sustaining this progress and ensuring program managers effectively execute our acquisition programs. As the Acting Deputy Undersecretary for Management and Acting Chief Acquisition Officer, I am the one responsible for overseeing policies, processes, procedures used to acquire and oversee goods and services for the Department. The momentum gained from the Secretary's Unity of Effort initiative has accelerated the work undertaken by previous Undersecretaries for Management as well as Directors of Acquisition Review to build a stronger management framework much earlier in the investment cycle. It has been exactly 1 year today since Secretary Johnson formally launched the Unity of Effort initiative to better integrate the Department's people, organizational structures, and operational capability while emphasizing the need to improve acquisition management. Later today, the Secretary will release an update outlining the excellent progress we have made to implement Unity of Effort. While progress has been made, more needs to and will be done. In this update, the Secretary will direct me, the USM, to begin a new effort called Acquisition Innovations in Motion, or AIM. AIM is simply a set of ongoing and reoccurring activities designed to enhance how the Department does business and its continued improvement of our acquisition process and industry engagement to maximize our capability to deliver and procure the best solutions possible. I was pleased when GAO reported that our acquisition policy framework is generally sound and reflects key program management best practices. This framework serves to bind the DHS acquisition community around a common operating procedure. In addition to a more substantive policy framework, we have engaged the community in the following areas. We now have an active Joint Requirements Council consisting of senior operational executives from every component in headquarters. The JRC works with cross-component mission portfolio teams to identify common capability needs and challenges across DHS, then oversees and conducts rigorous analysis and assessments. Ultimately, this work will be codified into a lasting and functional framework for the Department's requirements process. Our acquisition management improvements are due to strong acquisition leadership, commitment, and the dedication and expertise of our workforce, who are building a solid foundation of strong acquisition policies and practices to make us better. We are hiring and training the next generation of acquisition professionals through our intern programs. We are committed to attracting and retaining top talent to effectively and efficiently plan and execute our acquisition programs. We will continue to apply ourselves to acquisition management improvement through better processes and increased oversight, which will lead us through the next phase of acquisition reform. To sustain our success, we will continue to institutionalize a more integrated approach to acquisition management that will result in sound, empirically based decisions around strategy, planning, acquiring needed capabilities, and oversight of acquisition programs. In closing, I want to reiterate that it is our fundamental responsibility to manage the Department effectively and efficiently. Sound management is critical to our ability to execute our mission successfully, and it is incumbent upon us as guardians of the public trust to be mindful of how we expend public funds. You have my commitment that I will continue to focus intensely on strengthening the department's acquisition management functions, and that I will work closely with this committee and with GAO to achieve that goal. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Fulgham. Chair now recognizes Dr. Sims for your testimony, sir.
Good afternoon, Chairman Perry, Ranking Member Watson-Coleman, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'm Dr. Sims, partner of Evermay Consulting Group. I was the first executive director of the DHS Office of Program Accountability and Risk Management, also known as PARM. I served DHS headquarters roles for over 3 years. My federal career also includes over 8 years with the United States Secret Service, a window that also included the post 9/11 transition of Secret Service from Treasury into the Department of Homeland Security. I'm a native Texan and a graduate of Texas A&M University, and have 22 years of experience in engineering, executive management, applied to law enforcement, and Homeland Security pursuits. In 2011, I led the development and implementation of the Office of Program Accountability and Risk Management, with the highest level support of the Undersecretary for Management and my peer executive officers. This was a crucial time for the agency, and the creation of PARM was necessary to address ongoing challenges with program management. In the simplest terms, PARM has 2 fundamental responsibilities. The first is program accountability. This means that all stakeholders, not just the program manager, are accountable to the program for its success. The second is risk management. This objective is to address risks that are inherent in complex programs while supporting prioritization of investment decisions. An effective PARM will create an environment where the probability of program success increases while reducing risks that cause waste and inefficiency. With PARM, departmental acquisition was improved by putting in place methods to address front-end requirements and back-end program management. The goal is to minimize risk, encourage fiscal responsibility, and improve end-to-end execution across the entire acquisition lifecycle. In fiscal year 2011, acquisition programs represented nearly $18 billion of the department's $55 billion budget. In my first role at headquarters, I supported the DHS Chief Information Officer's review of over 79 major information technology programs that accounted for the vast majority of $6.4 billion worth of IT spend. From this rigorous effort, we observed pockets of excellence across DHS programs, but there are also many troubled programs. Despite its large budget, DHS had very little department-wide institutionalization of program management disciplines, standards, or tools. Coincidentally, GAO had just delivered a letter to the DHS Secretary in September of 2010 advising to strengthen requirements and development processes. In the letter, perennial program management deficiencies were highlighted. The confluence of events was a clear call to action for reforms in program management. I established PARM as an office to institute reforms with clear objectives. First, rationalize the requirements development process. Second, improve and streamline governance. Next, solidify the component acquisition executive role. Furthermore, enhance business intelligence and expand the acquisition workforce while strengthening program and project management training. These were the guiding principles of PARM. By the time of my departure, some 3 years later, the department was armed with the experience gained from a review of over 100 programs and the conduct of over 70 acquisition review boards. We drew lessons from both successful and unsuccessful experiences. Acquisition decisions were well documented, and expectations of program improvements were clear. The ongoing body of work to be achieved was extensive, but reflected shared departmental responsibilities. The recent report about the current state of acquisition management at DHS highlights that DHS programs are still exhibiting various levels of adherence to Acquisition Management Directive 102. However, I am encouraged by DHS Secretary Jay Johnson's unity of effort to drive more efficient and mature practices for managing investments. Acquisition processes were not perfect and are still maturing. This could only be achieved through a common discipline and set of practices that drive transparency and uniformity in decision-making. The successful delivery of major programs must continue to be a strategic business function of the department. Those who directly carry out the mission require and deserve the tools and processes to help address their evolving mission needs effectively and efficiently. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm very happy to be here to support your efforts, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Sims. Chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes for questioning. I'll start with Secretary Fulgham. You know, in reading the GAO report, I got to tell you, I was struck by things you didn't know, right? The impact to our border and maritime security and the scheduled delays of several major CBP and Coast Guard acquisition programs. I've already mentioned them, but it bears repeating. The CBP integrated fixed towers over 6 years late. Coast Guard long-range surveillance aircraft over 9 years late, and the National Security Cutter 4 years late. The Fast Response Cutter over 4 years late. You know, with immigration being an issue, and this isn't meant to be a gotcha question, just curiously, when you talk about the integrated fixed tower system, that's 6 years late according to this. Any idea of how, because I think it's important to put it in terms so people understand that the failure of the acquisition process has consequences on the ground. Any idea how many illegal aliens will, is there an estimate that how many will penetrate the border at those locations where the towers are supposed to be and are not?
Well, first of all, as you know, I'm not the immigration expert.
Right.
But I can talk to you about what we're doing to get the program delivered.
Okay.
So when we talk about 6 years, that's from SBI Net. That, as you and GAO has documented, that program did not deliver. So we stopped the program, restructured the program. The current program is 21 months behind schedule for 2 reasons. First of all, when we got the bids in, we got a lot more than we thought we were going to get, so it took us longer to go through that demonstration period. The second part is the award was protested. We've gotten past that now, and we are now on a path to deliver that capability, albeit, as you said, later than we would have liked.
Let me ask you this. This is part of the script, so to speak, or the questions, but it's $1 billion, right? That's what I have, $1 billion. How did we get $1 billion into it before we figured out it wasn't working? I mean, how does that happen? So, as you know, I wasn't here then, but what I would tell you is, based on my experience, that DHS's acquisition process, and this is a key tenet of what the Secretary is driving us towards, is if you get it right up front, you're going to be able to deliver. So in other words, if you get the requirements up front correctly, and they're well-defined, and they're with operator input, and you get the right mission needs statement, the right operational requirements document, you get a well-defined requirement, you'll get a better cost estimate, you'll get more reliable budgets, and then you'll be able to proceed through the acquisition process. What has hampered DHS's ability in the past has been the lack of a strong requirements process. The Secretary is fixing that. Standing up the JRC is an important milestone. It is up and running, and it has actually approved its first joint operational requirements document. It's got a lot more work to do. We need to get the governance underneath it in place, but that, and I think my colleague from GAO would agree, as well as Cedric, is that is the key to a successful acquisition, is identifying requirements up front and getting them right. Sir, if I can brief you back, it sounds, to make it simple for me, because it took a couple minutes, but what I heard is we didn't know, the department didn't know what they were asking for, or they couldn't identify the requirements and articulate them, so that it's not the contractor's fault that they gave us what we asked for. We didn't really know what we were asking for, it sounds like. I mean, to a certain extent, I just wonder how you get $1 billion into it before you figure that out.
So I would say that...
I mean, let me ask you this. How are, I heard it was on the one project, I think that Ms. Mackin mentioned 6 of 15 or something were untested. Like, that's essentially 50% or something. How are we buying anything that's untested?
So I would characterize it this way. First of all, we leveraged testing of, for example, the 130s, we leveraged testing of the Air Force. So while we didn't do the testing, we leveraged testing that DOD did. In another case, while we didn't do operational testing, we did acceptance testing. So, and let me just be very clear. Since I've been the Undersecretary for Management in the acting role, we've had ARBs, and every ARB, no program moves forward without test and evaluation looking at us and saying, yes, we are comfortable, we have looked at the test plan, we've got an accurate assessment, and we're good with it moving forward. So I believe we fixed that problem. But in the past, as she has said, some programs have not had all the KPPs, as she identified, documented in a way that said how we went through that assessment.
So real quick, since my time's expired, but just to finish the thought. So now that you are here and you've instituted the program, how long until people like me see results?
So I think you're already seeing results.
And I'll let you stop there. We can. Okay. I don't want to hold other folks up. So in the interest of time, I appreciate it. We'll continue. Yes, with that, the chair now recognizes the ranking member, gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Watson-Coleman.
Thank you very much. I have a lot of questions, so let me see if I can get really quick answers. So I want to start with the GAO. Do you think the department is moving in the right directions? And is the department organizing appropriately? Is it creating the entities necessary to ensure that there is good decision-making in the first place, accountability, and then verifiability? Is it moving in the right direction?
I think it is moving in the right direction. As you know, there are acquisition oversight responsibilities at all levels in the department, from the USM to PARM, and importantly, the components and the program offices. And I think that's, if I had to pick one area where I think more could be done, it's at the component and program office level. The policies, as we've said for many years, are sound. It's a matter of following them in practice.
So the component, and what was the other thing you said, component and?
Program offices.
Programs.
So down to the lower levels in the organization.
Yes, so then, thank you. Let me move on to Mr. Fulgham, because you mentioned something in testimony that I read that had to do with personnel. I don't know if it was inadequate personnel, not enough personnel. To what extent are we having these concerns about the department's success here, having to do with personnel as opposed to systems? And is it an issue, and what is the issue with personnel?
So I believe the issue you're referring to is the program office having adequate staffing and the training of those folks. So what we've done is we've done a program assessment of the staffing needs of the various programs out in DHS. There are gaps in those programs, just like there are gaps in staffing needs across the department, and we're working to aggressively fill those gaps. In addition to that, we have an excellent training institute where we get interns. We have about 60 at any given time going through the pipeline. We graduate about 30 a year to feed those programs. So I believe we're on the right track. The last thing I'd say very quickly is that no program, again, every program that comes before us has to talk to us about staffing. They have to show us how many folks they have on board versus what they need. And if it's not adequate, that's one of the considerations whether they move forward or not.
So do you have an issue with recruiting people or training people or retaining people?
So I think we have an excellent recruiting tool in that acquisition, our Acquisition Institute. In the past, we've had some trouble placing them and retaining them. Tight budgets mean folks were squeezing down the number of folks they had. I think we've solved that now, and we're able to place those graduates within DHS and keep them.
So the memo that I referred to that that was just delivered to Congress, and I guess yesterday, or today, excuse me, referred to a number of instances where you deviated from, or not you, but the department deviated from its practices and granted waivers. And there was an indication that there was going to be an assessment of those instances, and that there was going to be, I guess, a finding one way or the other with regard to those waivers that were given. Has that been done?
So we agreed with GAO. I issued an ADM, I believe yesterday, an acquisition decision memorandum that said three basic things. First of all, it told program offices to give us a 5-year projection on those programs and sustainment in terms of cost. Second thing it did, and this is very important, is I said I need an end date. When is this program scheduled to be done? and be complete, because that's important for us, so it signals when we have to start looking for the next investment. And the third thing that we asked my office to do in CFO is simply to make sure that we are looking at these 42 programs as we go through our normal programming and budgeting process, that they get the appropriate visibility so that we make sure that we're not seeing cost growth or things of that nature, and we can address it through the budget process.
What, if anything, do you need from us?
Well,
Besides calling you down every other day for hearing.
I think the bill that was passed last year would certainly help us codify and give us the authority that we need. It would codify the framework that we have. I think you're going to have to give us some time. I know you hear that a lot from people that sit up here, but you're going to have to give us some time in terms of maturing the joint requirements process and getting the foundation that started poured concrete over so that it's institutionalized. But we are, I think we're making huge improvements each and every day, and I think our acquisition process is getting better.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back my time, even though my questions are.
Chair thanks the gentlewoman, and Chair now recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, the maker of the bill, Mr. Duncan.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. It's almost a year ago that we sat in this very room and had this same conversation about acquisition reform for DHS. And we still see a GAO report that talks about scheduled delays for up to 4 years, the need for baselines and performance metrics, the need for program oversight and performance discipline. Bottom line is we see programs and solutions which are late, cost more, and do less than originally promised. Last year, the House passed a bill that I authored to put acquisition reform in place. Secretary Johnson assured me that it wasn't necessary, that he was going to implement the same acquisition reforms at DHS. I hope that's the case. I hope we're continue to talk about accountability, discipline, and transparency, because the nation's $18+ trillion in debt. And every dollar that's wasted through schedule delays or the lack of this acquisition process that's necessary with the necessary metrics and oversight is a dollar that can't be used to defend our borders, can't be used to protect our communities or protect our citizens. And so I think this is so important. I would love to see this committee and Congress pass a version of an acquisition reform bill similar to what we passed last year, maybe with a few changes. So the question I have, and Ms. Macon, you were, I believe, in this committee last year, and we were having these conversations. The question I have, Mr. Fulgham, is what's happening over DHS? With Secretary Johnson's assurances to me last year that he was going to continue down this track and put forth an internal policy for acquisition reform, bring me up to speed.
Okay, I can tell you what we've been doing over the last year. First of all, as I said, we stood up a joint requirements process, which is key to improving acquisition. It's up and running. It has approved its first joint requirements document. That's one document, I know that, but that's a strong signal that we are serious about getting the requirements piece right. What Secretary Johnson was also talking about is making sure that we have the right folks doing strategy, because strategy drives requirements. So we've reorganized our policy to be a strategy and planning function that feeds the requirements process. And then from the acquisition oversight perspective, we've conducted over 22 ARBs, and they're not ARBs where we just sit around and discuss things. They are outcome-oriented ARBs. I've chaired 13 of them myself, and we've had programs that have come in like Air and Marine that haven't been to an ARB in at least 4 or 5 years. They came, we gave them actions, and they're doing those actions. And we'd be happy to share with you the progress we're making in terms of each one of those programs. So I believe that, again, we've got a ways to go, but the Secretary charged us with getting acquisition right, and we're doing it.
And Ms. Macon, you agree with that assessment and the 2015 report that just came out?
I guess cautiously optimistic would be the way I would phrase it. We have been calling for the Joint Requirements Council, for example, to be reformulated since 2008. So now it's chartered, that's good. We haven't seen any outputs yet. I know aviation requirements was first up, so we haven't seen the documentation. I look forward to looking at it, but more importantly, seeing an output are requirements going to be considered across the department in more of a portfolio aspect so that there's not some duplication that may be there right now? I do think requirements is the most important consideration right now for the department.
Right. Do you agree that this type of oversight from Congress is important?
Absolutely, and as was mentioned, we also did definitely support the bill from last year. I think it would go a long way toward codifying some roles and responsibilities within the department, calling for acquisition baselines for all programs, reporting structures when there is a breach of cost schedule or performance thresholds, and so forth.
I want to thank you. Thank you for all your work, and also at the department, Undersecretary Johnson. I would love to see where a new program, not some of these that we've talked about in the past, but where a new program is brought forward. You've advised Congress that this is how you're going to acquire, this is the baseline, this is the metrics, this is the performance standards we put in place, this is sort of the review that we're going to do, and let us track that process as well, because I think it's important that we save taxpayer dollars in these times. Mr. Chairman, it's 3:15 in the afternoon, 3:20. It's not the grooviest time slot, whether you're on TV or whether you're in Congress, in a congressional committee. C-SPAN's probably not covering this. It's the grooviest topic that's out there. But it's so important when we talk about saving taxpayer dollars, because every dollar is important. So I commend you for that, and I yield back.
Chair, thanks. Gentlemen, and as I read through the briefing, you look at up to $10 billion in acquisition cost loss. I don't know, $10 billion seems like real money to be around here, and we could probably use it on occasion from some of the things I've seen. But with that, the Chair now turns to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Torres.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Fulham, DHS has the third largest budget in your agency is the third largest, with $18 billion spent in goods and services annually. This report has also identified that personnel has failed to follow established guidelines. What factors contribute to the ongoing schedule delays, cost overruns, and the failure to complete programs as intended? And I know that you've been asked this over and over, and we will continue to ask over and over, because the seriousness, of what of the reports that we are receiving, I tend to agree with my colleagues. We have to protect taxpayers' dollars, and this is the only avenue that we have to do that.
We agree with that. And I'll start with, again, the requirements process. A better defined requirement leads to a better cost estimate, which then leads to a better budget build. That alone won't do it, but that puts the program on a good start. Then we also, as a part of that requirements process, one thing I need to mention is that our S&T Directorate is a key member of that body, because they need to look at the technical aspects of what the requirement is and how we're going about solving that requirement to make sure it's technologically feasible, because as she has mentioned in her reports, at times you've got a good requirement, but it's just not technologically mature. So why are programs over cost? Because, again, we need better defined requirements, and it'll get you a better cost estimate. But I'll be frank with you, budget uncertainty has certainly contributed to this. Our budgets have been going up and down, and the timing associated with getting those budgets has definitely been a contributing factor.
So how do you intend to complete the 22 acquisition programs as conceived, and how will the department address the shortfalls in funding that have already been identified?
So for the 6 programs that have been mentioned here today that need an approved program baseline, they will have one by the end of this year. Because what I've told those programs is simply this: I need a goalpost, first of all. Then we'll get a revised cost estimate, and then we'll be able to come to closure on those programs. Each one of them are in various stages of their acquisition life cycle, but I can tell you that where they're missing a cost estimate, by the end of this year, we'll have 7 of the 10 that need cost estimates done. The other 3 will be done by the first quarter of 16, so we'll have that done. And then those that are in breach will come back in front of the ARB, and they'll be told, here's how, I need to hear from you how you plan to get the program back on track.
Lastly, will you walk me through the process, the actions that DHS is taking to ensure that the ARB is meeting consistently to review the major acquisition programs?
So a couple things. One, we've had 22 ARBs, I think, in the past 12 months, 13 while I've been there. So it's the responsibility of the director of PARM to look out and see when the next major acquisition milestone event is, or if we have said, I want to see the program every 3 to 6 months, whether there's an acquisition decision event or not, it's his job to make sure those programs are coming in. As I said before, coming before us is interesting, that's good, but then what are the actions and outcomes that we want and that we codify in an ADM? So it's the director's responsibility to tell me how we are progressing on those actions, which he does.
So the next step would be for us to call the director of PARM in here and say, what are the action items and why have we not seen the follow-up that we need to see in order to ensure that you have meetings and that you have actual, you can show for something. I don't want meet and greet meetings.
No,
we want results.
That's right, and I can show, we can provide, and we do provide the ADMs, every acquisition decision memorandum that we write, we do provide a copy of it to the Congress. We're happy to do that. We're also happy to come talk to you about the outcomes that we've had and where we are on each one of those.
Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentlewoman. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Clausen.
Thanks, y'all, for coming. Thank you for doing this this committee meeting. I was in Foreign Affairs, and so what happens is we're often double booked. So apologize for being here late, but it does not indicate a lack of interest. I showed up in June of last year and came in on a special election. And it's kind of, having come from the private sector where we normally try to get as much information as we can before we make it a decision, it's been an odd change for me to be in an environment where we are asked to make decisions and there's very little data. And so we keep coming to these committee meetings and we get real, live, meaningful anecdotes, of which I do not in any way criticize. But when it comes to baseline information of any sort, capital expenditure information, historical or otherwise, cost information, return on investment to the taxpayer, whichever part of Homeland Security it is, and I'm not trying to be partisan at all, I just can't get any baseline data. And so sometimes I'm asked, will you approve a certain, new border investment or something else? And I always feel befuddled because with no data, nothing that demonstrates any kind of, adherence in the past, it's hard to make a choice. I don't know how much capital expenditures are being spent here. I don't know where it goes. I don't know. We just don't know anything, and the reports I see from the GAO says there's really no baseline. And so I kind of say to myself, how do we get here where we spend all these millions and billions, don't know where it goes, can't measure how we're doing, and no baseline in place? Does that make sense? And so, and when I go see, for example, I went to see Mr. Fugate at FEMA, he says he's setting up. He never had it before. He's setting in the baseline, and we believe him. It looks like he's doing all the right things. But on a general sense, I would like to help in a nonpartisan way, but I don't know how to do that without any data, and I don't know how to get it. And so you all are probably get better data than we see, and I don't know how much of that is because Congress becomes partisan. I would just like to be able to get some data so we would know whether taxpayers are getting a fair return and people are doing a good job. And that doesn't seem too complicated. And no matter who I ask, who have sat in your chair, I've never received any data. And I'm not trying to be critical or criticize. I'd just like to know where things stand. Now, does what I just laid on you, does that seem par for the course, or am I missing something obvious here on how to get enough data to where we can really do our jobs as kind of the board of directors? And I'll let you all respond to that one by one. Because with no data, I can't say who's doing a good job and who's not. And I'm sorry if any of this repeats what has already gone on today.
I guess I would comment, just speaking about major acquisition programs, there is a database that the department has that was part of the work we did. We went to look at how good the data was. So that database is supposed to have cost estimates for all these programs, baseline data, schedules, changes to those schedules, all the information that you might be talking about. We did find inaccuracies. In fact, the data wasn't reliable enough for us to really assess, but that was one recommendation we made. And again, it goes back to program managers and the components. They're supposed to be going in there and entering the correct data for their programs and validating it, and DHS agreed to see why that wasn't happening.
So as she said, it's not the data, it's the quality of the data. The data is there. And so let me tell you what we're doing about it. We've talked to each and every chief acquisition executive and said what's in the system she's referring to needs to be updated monthly and it needs to be accurate. And so what we're going to do is each month we're just going to start measuring the validity and accuracy of that data. Because what she's also referring to is we provide Congress a comprehensive acquisition status report every year that has all the things she just described in it. The criticism in the past is some of that data is not accurate. We've done, it's better than it was, but more work needs to be done. But we do have a comprehensive acquisition report that we provide each year. And we provide quarterly status updates.
And who sets the goals?
With regard to
how much improvement on the baseline, how much implementation on the baseline.
So that's one of my jobs, is to say how much better are we going to get over time. That's one of my jobs, working with the component acquisition executives and the program managers.
Sir, it's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Cedric Sims. I would share with you that one of the things that I would share with the program staff was that the programs often, the way that they begin is how they're going to end. And so there are a lot of complex programs at the department that had a rocky start and probably haven't quite gotten right yet. With respect to data, there was a number of systems that were implemented to support data collection. Some of those programs had on their own, some of them were at headquarters, and finding a common way to get that data in one place was a key objective of PARM, and I believe the GAO report refers to some of those systems. At some point, realizing the data at the beginning is not going to be pretty, and understanding that sometimes there's training, people agree the same number means the same thing. We talk about a cost estimate, let's all agree to what a cost estimate actually is. And then from that point, improvements can be driven. So from that, certainly PARM as an organization had traditionally helped do the validity and the validation work around that data collection. And PARM's role as an independent arbiter of that is very critical and continues to need to be reinforced.
If the gentleman yield, it's my understanding that there is a report given with some of the data or much of the data that you've asked for, but by statute it goes to appropriations, who's not always or often willing to give it to this committee. In the legislation that's being offered, there would be a solution set there where we too would get the data. So that should be helpful to.
Right. I guess my point is, or one of my point is, data against a baseline, against a goal that's been previously discussed, then allows folks to be able to make some sort of rough judgment on performance and on terms of accountability. If we have a baseline in this committee on much of the cost data and capital expenditure data of the department, we haven't seen it. And therefore, if you show us progress, it's hard to measure progress without having had a baseline and without having, when we had the hearing here on capital expenditures, we were given a list of capital expenditures from 2010, as I recall. I was embarrassed. And so as much as you all can put it in a package that the board of directors or the committee can understand in a summary state, and therefore be able to make some sort of judgments and some sort of conclusions, and then we can be supportive on the direction of the department. Does that make sense to you all? And so on every group that comes in here, I'm always urging, please give us data in a way that we can draw performance conclusions in a clear managerial way, just like the folks that are running the departments. Massive data that's uncorrelated or unconnected in systems that aren't integrated, and in managerial cost data that's not defined across the organization, probably won't it just swamps me, you know, and probably won't. I think, Dr. Sims, you understand what I'm saying here. So if you're not integrated yet inside enough to where you can come up with common data for yourselves to manage the organization, it will be impossible for us to do so from this side, and then we just get into partisan criticizing based on anecdotes as opposed to real data. I don't mean to sound, you know, like I'm going on and on here, but Dr. Sims and both of y'all, does that make sense? And where are we on that? How close would we be in order to coming up with some sort of managerial summary? And I'm sorry if I'm taking too long.
We're going to move on. We're going to do a second round here just to make sure we get all the questions, give an opportunity for all questions to be asked. Mr. Sims, you're the former executive director, as stated, of PARM, and a couple things. I'm just wondering what you see the challenges. Is it more poor oversight by DHS? Is it more, or would you characterize it as poor program management from a component of systematic approach, if you had to choose?
Well, you give me a difficult set of choices there.
Well, we have them every day here.
Indeed. I apologize, but I wouldn't characterize it as either, if you don't mind, sir. I would say that what we have is a circumstance where when a program is put under the hot light of an acquisition review, things get right. They really do. There's no question. I think that that's been a very effective process. But DHS has a very vast enterprise, and so scalability is important. Baselines are absolutely the first thing that must be established for programs. If we don't have a baseline, we don't have anything to evaluate, we have no way to measure progress. It would be a welcome thing, I think, at some point to see a number of baselines coming and being reported as being rebaselined as programs mature their processes and really understand what those baselines should be and how the program can ultimately deliver on the performance expected. We have a phenomenal program management core at the Department of Homeland Security. I would recognize that there are several outstanding program executives at DHS, but there are also some areas for improvement. And I think often when you see a successful program, you can point to a very successful program executive running that program.
Let me continue with you. There's this is a little bit of an uncomfortable question, but I think it's important to determine, if we can, some of the facts here, or at least your perception, because there's potentially a trust issue, and of course this is the public may see this differently than maybe what might be alleged. But there was the wife of a former DHS Inspector General, Mr. Charles Edwards, who I'm not familiar, so who faced Mr. Edwards apparently faced serious allegations of a lack of independence and nepotism, and apparently Miss Edwards was one of the employees at PARM. Can you flesh that out for us at all? Can you tell us, is that normal? Is there a policy? I mean, and it may be one thing to be two members of the same family in the organization, but one is the Inspector General. You can see the perception, if not the reality, that it creates. Is there anything that you can impart to us to kind of allay our fears that this was just purely nepotism, that there might have been undue influence, et cetera?
Yes, sir, I'd be happy to, and I don't find that uncomfortable at all. We had the benefit of being able to scale PARM fairly significantly in terms of staff and put out some job announcements for opportunities. As I recall, I believe her name was Maduri Edwards. She was selected as one of the individuals for PARM. At that time, and I just want to be very clear, I was the executive director of the office. I had a number of staff that were responsible for staffing those positions. I hired my deputy directors and told them to run with it from there. Her degree of candidacy and the degree to which she was the appropriate selectee for a role, I can only believe that the process worked as it should. She was not an employee of mine. I had departed PARM by the time she actually reported to work, and so I can't speak to her performance thereafter.
Thank you. I appreciate it. With that, I'll yield to the ranking member, Ms. Watson-Coleman, for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Sims, I want to talk to you a little bit about, because you've been inside, now you're outside, and I'd like to kind of get your perspective on a couple of things. What impact do you think that the Secretary's One DHS initiative is having on increasing morale among the acquisition personnel and producing better outcomes regarding program management?
Madam, thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you. I think that that's yet to be seen. I think the opportunity to improve morale is there. I think that most employees at the department, I'm just reflecting upon my time, had a good opportunity to mentor a number of employees that were seeking opportunities to come into the executive service at some point in their career. And I found that most were seeking authenticity, consistency, clear messaging, and so forth. And certainly I can see out of the message, the unity message from Secretary Johnson, very, very strong intent there to drive that kind of consistency and authenticity in message. Also, too, DHS has a phenomenal mission, and every time we had an employee that was detailed from another component, I found that they were enriched by that opportunity. And I think the unity of effort will likely open avenues for components to share the best and the brightest across the organization, and quite frankly, utilize resources where they're best needed at the department. So I see it as a positive opportunity, but you know, the time for that to actually be shown as effective, I think we'll still see that.
Yeah. Whenever we have a discussion of the department, we hear of this great effort, this unity of effort that Secretary Johnson has advanced, and it is always spoken of in a very encouraging and supportive way. And so we look forward to the fruit that it will bear, and because it does seem as if we are moving in the right direction in a number of areas, and that is at a department with such diversity. And just so many things happening at one time is amazing. Well, we'll never be perfect. I mean, as long as we're human beings, we'll never be perfect. But we need our systems and our accountability there so that we don't continue to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. And to that extent, what additional steps do you think that under the Secretary for Management and Executive Director of PARM take to ensure that the acquisition personnel have the training and tools to implement effective baseline measurements? And do you think that there's any need for additional policy authority or legal authority? And if so, what would that be? Dr. Sims.
Well, Madam, I had an opportunity to take a look at the bill from the prior Congress, and I believe that that would be a fantastic product to support institutionalization of some of the best practices at the department. I do believe that within the department, the policies that are in place are very robust. I think more of an understanding of how to actually apply them in different contexts will continue to enhance the application of that. So, you know, if a guidebook that says this is how do you do this, DHS has provided one in the past regarding this. And as we continue to refine the kind of capabilities that are delivered, we need to continue to provide that guidance to the programs. A playbook, a roadmap, some way that kind of helps everybody understand what this is about. And finally, I am encouraged and heard recently that there are some efforts to rationalize roles and responsibilities. Unfortunately, we see some things as black and white, and they never were intended to be. I know there are several efforts ongoing to strengthen the role of the CIO at the department. I think that should be in direct support of efforts to strengthen acquisition management at the department. Those things don't need to be in conflict. And again, I benefited from a prior career in working very closely with the DHS CIO and would hope that that'll continue at the department.
Both you and Mr. Fulgham have both mentioned the issue of maturation and institutionalization of the changes that are taking place, and I agree that we do need to be mindful of that also. Mr. Fulgham, correct? Thank you. You referred to having issued an ADM recently with regard to the memo that we received, and I'm just wondering, is there a time frame for sort of the, execution of the elements that are identified? What are we looking at in terms of a response?
So we've asked for the program offices to come back by the 29th of May to give us, again, that 5-year cost assessment. And then we will, as well as, again, that program end date. And then in the next, our current budget cycle, which is the FY17 budget cycle, we will take a look at those 42 programs in terms of where they are in their life cycle against that cost estimate and make the appropriate budgetary adjustments.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman thanks the ranking member. We are expecting votes anytime, but in the meantime, we'll recognize Mr. Clausen again, gentleman from Florida.
Do we, Mr. Fulgham, do we have integrated systems in IT, purchasing, HR, financial across the different areas of the organization? And is there a program underway right now to do that, or is the thinking to leave it decentralized?
No, we are looking on our financial systems, for example. We are well underway with a modernization effort, a shared services solution, wherein we go look at the current state of the market, and then we, my words, ride on those systems. So we've got TSA, Coast Guard, and DNDO scheduled to begin that process at the end of this fiscal year, and then we will move each one in a successive year. Right now we have 6 core financial systems in the department, and the goal is to reduce those and go to a shared service solution.
Yeah, that's a good idea. How long will that take?
Given our current budget, we are scheduled to be done in 2020. What I would like to do is see us accelerate that, but it'll be budget dependent.
And right now what you do is you integrate the data at the headquarter level, is that
So
right? So
from a financial systems perspective, we have some business intelligence that takes those disparate systems and integrates the data, but it's not ideal.
do you have integrated purchasing?
We do not have integrated purchasing integration with our financial systems across the board. We have some, but not a complete integration of the systems, which is, again, a fundamental requirement of our financial systems modernization effort. They have to provide procurement integration.
So do we have a way to measure how good we buy things or not? Or you let each entity do that now?
So we do have metrics on how well we're performing in buying goods and services. Our procurement officer has that. Can we be better? Yes, but we do have metrics on how well we're doing.
Okay, and then the last question, how long before, you're not going to have an integrated system until 2020 unless you get more money to go quicker. I understand that. So in the meantime, you integrate at a middle level or an upper level. I understand that because management has to run the operation. I got all that. How long, even if you measure on a local basis, how long before all of your different entities, organizations have baselines? What's the goal, and so that everybody has the measurable baselines that all of you all referred to earlier?
So if we're talking on our acquisition programs, so we have 6 programs that she referenced that will have acquisition program baselines by the end of this year from which to measure them going forward.
Sorry if I missed that. when I was gone.
And I would note that several years ago, we had 42 programs. We're down to 6. We'll get those 6 done this year. In terms of cost and schedule, particularly cost, we've got 10 programs left that don't have a good cost estimate. We'll have 7 of those done by this year, the remainder done in early 16.
And your IT system will have a managerial cost function that you can spread across each one of the acquisitions, right?
So as we move towards a modernized solution, we will have a common account structure, which is another challenge for DHS. We came from lots of different agencies. That common account structure will give you what it is you're looking for.
Okay, and then so the final word I have, and the most important, it feels to me like you're dealing in 1990 or 1985. And so good luck. You got a lot of work to do. And anything we can do, I mean, you know, I'm being totally serious here. You got a rough way to go ahead of you. You got a lot of work to do. And so you're integrating while you're improving performance at the same time. And that's not easy in any environment.
Yes.
So anything that we can do and I can do to support, doors open and we're ready to do so. And any information that would be helpful so that we can see how you're doing, that's also appreciated.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for all your work, because I know this is a tough job.
Yes, sir.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Just one final note before we leave to vote and adjourn the meeting. It's my understanding that there's been emphasis put on joint requirements, and I think the department has about roughly 220,000 employees, and of the joint requirements, 6 staff members have been designated or are designated. So if Mr. Fulgham, if you can verify that and tell us that that's appropriate, and then if Ms. Mackin can also validate that, or if you have concerns about that, it'd be great.
Yeah, I believe we do have 6 on board today. I believe that's accurate.
And that's the appropriate number?
I think we're still looking to expand that capability. We are leveraging, as I said in my opening statement, 5 portfolio teams as an underpinning, but I believe we're going to have to expand that, not only at the headquarters, but also within the components, because that's where the requirements come from.
Ms. Mackin, any thoughts?
Yeah, I don't know what the right number is. I think it's really important, though, to have an outcome, and if that means getting more people on board at the components, I think that's what will need to happen. So we'll be keeping an eye on that and getting briefed on how the JRC is doing.
Okay, thank you very much. I thank the witnesses for their valuable testimony and the members for their questions. The members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask you to respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7E, the hearing record will be open for 10 days, and without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.